Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets, Sports Talk 790.
Rockets,
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, as always presented by Clutch fans and with support from Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. As always, we are your host. I'm Ben DuBose. He's Paulo Alves. You can follow me on social media at Ben DuBose and Paulo at Paulo Alves NBA. And you can also read my work at USA Today's Rockets Wire and over on the Clutch Fans blog. So today is Friday, the 9th of January. Happy New Year to everyone listening. This is our first full show since the calendar flipped to 2026, so I think we're allowed to say that, at least I hope we are. Unfortunately, it has not been a great start to the new year for the Rockets, though they've been a moderate to heavy favorite in each of the 4 games they played. We had mentioned in the previous pod that this is a very favorable part of the schedule, but the Rockets are just 2-2 in the 4 games they played to date, and they're also going to be without star big man Alperen Sengun for at least a few more days because he sprained his right ankle. This week, the Rockets have had 2 games go right down to the wire. In one case, they had the basketball gods smiling upon them. In the second case, they did not. Monday against the Suns, Kevin Durant hit the dagger 3 with a second left. But then Wednesday in Portland, what would have been a game-winning tip shot by Tari Eason was determined on replay review to have been a split second after the buzzer. So the Rockets took a 1-point loss, and with that loss, they fall to 22-12 and all the way to the number 6 spot in the Western Conference standings, though we should note that it's very tight between 2 and 6, so there's a lot of room to climb the standings rapidly if you can just stack some wins together, and theoretically, you can start that tonight with the rematch against the Trailblazers in that same building. With that said, I'm struggling to buy in on this idea of a winning streak because they just haven't stacked wins in a while. And to me, the biggest takeaway from these last few games, and particularly the 2 against the Suns and the Trailblazers, is that the Rockets just shouldn't have let each game go down to the wire in the first place. Yet they just did, and it's not really a one-off. You know, if you look at any one game out of 82 in isolation, you can always find some fluky things that should correct as you get a larger sample. You know, the Trailblazers game, the Rockets shot 8 of 36 from 3. They were literally the best team in the NBA at three-point shooting accuracy through a big chunk of December, and now they're literally dead last in January. So that should correct. That's fluky. But even if we account for that, there just hasn't been any consistency for a while. I would actually argue that the most consistent thing about them is that they're inconsistent. They're just notoriously playing up or down to the competition. You know, back in December, they had that stretch where they were awful defensively. Now for January, they're back in the top 6 in defensive rating. They figured that out, but suddenly it's the offense after being in the top 2 for most of the season. Well, now it's completely mediocre. In January, they're 15th among the league's 30 teams. Live ball turnovers are still an issue in most games, and of course, there's some roster circumstances you can point to. We knew the turnovers without Fred VanVleet were going to be a problem. The offense overall is worse without Sengun. He's maybe your best playmaker. For most of December, you didn't have Tari Eason or Dorian Finney-Smith, and so that hurt you defensively. But every team in the NBA has injuries. It's a contact sport. And what I just keep coming back to is that the Rockets overcame them just fine in October and November. That was a team that we talked about entering December. Paulo, you had that stat that they had the 5th best net rating in NBA history when they were 13-4 and just bludgeoning teams through Thanksgiving. They didn't have Fred for any of those games. They didn't have Tari for at least half of November. They had a couple of games without KD. They certainly didn't have perfect health, but they were dominant nonetheless. And so what's deflating is that after Wednesday's loss in Portland, that's the 17th game since that 13-4 start. and they're 9-8 in these last 17 games. As mediocre as it gets, and several of those have been bad losses to teams like the Pelicans, the Kings, the Jazz, now the Blazers, and it's literally an identical sample to the 17 games that started the year. So as good as that was, we've now had pure mediocrity for an equal sample that offsets that. And what struck me the most watching that game in Portland, I wasn't even that mad, Paulo. Like, when they lost those games in December to lesser teams, I was pissed. I was blowing up our WhatsApp chat. I was just so convinced they were better than that. And it was just an inexplicably bad showing or just really unlucky, something like that. And these days, I just sort of shrug my shoulders. Like, I did have a very brief #Houston Sports moment when Tari's buzzer beater was a tenth of a second late, but logically, I know the bigger issue there is that the game shouldn't have been close to begin with. So what that's led me to, I think, at least for me, I need to reset my expectations a little bit, and perhaps we all do. It's certainly not to say the season is over, that they can't win a championship, not saying anything like that. There's still 48 games left in the regular season. We're talking about 2 17-game samples here. Those are basically each a fifth of the regular season, and so you've still got 3 more of those segments to go. So it is entirely possible that this last 17-game stretch that's been just pure mediocrity, maybe it's the exception to the rule. Sengun should be back in the next few days. Maybe Fred comes back by the playoffs and defies the odds. DFS is going to play more minutes. He should get better. KD looks absolutely brilliant, and so that always gives you a chance. And then by the time you get to the playoffs, maybe this tendency of playing up or down to the competition, it pays off because there's no back-to-backs. We know that's been a problem for this team. And then every game is more meaningful, so hopefully you're playing up. You can also point out that the Rockets right now are 11-2 at home, 11-10 on the road. That tells you they've had way more road games, and so maybe things course correct when they play in Houston a ton more. So for all of those reasons, I'm not pressing the panic button. What I mean by resetting expectations, we just shouldn't look at this team as the juggernaut that I think a lot of us wanted to believe when they were heading into December. When I saw the way they played and their metrics in October and November, I was thinking back to that 65-win juggernaut in 2018, the one that went 42-3 when Chris Paul, James Harden, and Clint Capella all played. Because for the first 6 weeks of this season, these guys weren't that far off in terms of the metrics, in terms of the dominance. But I think it's just been long enough now that I'm calling it. This is not that type of team. It's not to say that they can't recapture it later on, at least in spurts. I hope they can. It's not implausible. And in fairness, you can argue that maybe we never should have had those expectations as soon as Fred went down with the ACL. But even so, I think it's a little bit of a letdown because they did tease us, even without Fred, with that level of dominance for the first 6 weeks or so. And now that's pretty much gone. You see it in flashes here or there, a game once or so a week, but nothing sustained at all. So before we go into any of the micro trends, I wanted to start with the macro. Paulo, where are you at with this team as far as the big picture? Are you still hoping that maybe this team can get to 55 or 60 wins and get a top 2, top 3 seed? Or are we basically getting to a point where it's just get to the playoffs healthy, try to get the best matchups you can, even if it's a 6th seed, all that matters is April, May, and June? My question for you at this point, Paulo, after 9-8 in the last 17 games, is there still a path for this team to become dominant in the regular season? Or are we at a point where we just sort of accept that, this is who they are and maybe put our eggs in the basket of hoping they put it together when it matters most? Sort of like, Dirk Nowitzki did for a 57-win Dallas team back in 2011 when he was starting to age. Maybe a 37-year-old KD can follow that template in 26. I guess the bottom line, and my question for you, Paulo, have these past few weeks changed your expectations at all, at least in terms of the regular season? Because at least for me, it feels like the floor is a decent bit lower, even if the ceiling is still what it was.
Well, I can't say they haven't, because if you asked me a couple of weeks back, I might have said something crazy like, oh, I think this team's going to win 60 games. And I don't think that anymore. However, my kind of delta in opinion is not, I think, as large as yours and as large as a lot of people's on Twitter. And, some of this might be, and I'll be honest up front. If the game's at 3 a.m., which I think is a 9 p.m. start for y'all, I'm not watching. Like I work full time. I can't do it anymore. I did it for a few years. It just ruins the entire week. So it seems like we are, and this is, just the weird ways you find patterns. It seems like we seem to be worse at those games than we are at the normal games. I mean, I'll watch a 3 a.m. game if it's like a Friday or Saturday, right? But in the other days I won't. And it just seems like I wake up, the first thing I do, I go check the result, and it seems like we've lost more times than not when I have to do that. I'm not. This is not, a stat because I haven't checked it, but it certainly feels that way. So just to say that my spirits might be a little bit inflated compared to someone who has watched those games as well. So moving on, from what is barely analysis to what might actually qualify as it. I do think that this team is still a 55 win team. I think there are a few things that have worked into, or a combination of a few factors that have led to, this shaky kind of 500 stretch of basketball that Rockets have been on, and it's been a group of things, right? We haven't had Fred from very early on, and then we didn't have Tari, and we didn't have Dorian Finney-Smith, and that's 3 key rotation players on a team. And well, if you go to any team and you take away 3 key rotation players, they won't be as good, or they won't be on a 60-win pace. Even the Thunder look mortal nowadays. And then now that we've gotten Tari and Dorian Finney-Smith back, Dorian Finney-Smith that hasn't been, that good. He's been good on defense. He's helped there, but he hasn't been able to shoot the ball yet. But we lost Sengun in that stretch, which is, an even bigger blow than losing those 2 guys. So it seems like this team earlier on even was able to fight off a few injuries. Because they were shooting just raw lights out from 3. It was never really sustainable for Sengun to be shooting 40-something% from 3. It was never really sustainable for Reed Sheppard to be a 47% 3-point shooter and I know we'll talk about Reed a little bit later on, but that has died down, and our offense is no longer as absolutely supersonic as it was before to cover up our defensive mistakes and our lack of defensive intensity. But to be fair, our defensive intensity has picked up, and our rebounding, or at least those lapses that we used to have in rebounding, especially defensively, do seem to, with Dorian Finney-Smith and Torrey being back, have gone away for a little bit. Some of it might be because Steven Adams is starting in place of Sengun, which is obviously going to make your defense better and your offense a little worse. But when you look at the past few games, it's 103 to the Blazers, 97 to the Suns, 110 to the Mavs, and 96 to the Nets, right? And before that there's the Pacers game that was a blowout. So this to say, the defense seems to have picked up, but and I think this is my takeaway. It seems like even though the defense has picked up, the Rockets still do miss having a bit of an enforcer. And the Rockets had 2 last season with Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. And now they have none on defense. And we do have good defensive players that work hard, but there's a gap between that and having someone on the court that's constantly demanding you to play great defense to other guys on the team, right? Not saying they don't care, not saying someone doesn't care, not saying KD doesn't care at times. I mean, for what I expected, he's been better defensively than what I expected. For Reed Sheppard, same thing, right? Even Aaron Holiday, who's a decent defender, was a better defender last season, if you ask me. Even Jabari, who's an okay defender, I think he gets elevated if there's someone in his ear, constantly bringing that intensity. And I do think that Rockets lost some of their floor with the KD trade, right? And that floor came from Dillon Brooks, and it's even more noticeable because Fred isn't there. Not necessarily for what everybody talks about, which is they don't have a point guard. No, it's more on the defensive end that makes more of a difference. And I think that's what's that edge defensively in terms of influencing others, not necessarily as governing the Rockets governing their own, each player governing their own effort. I don't think that's a problem. I don't think Amans had effort problems, or Tari, or Jabari for that matter. Like, I don't think our main defensive guys have had effort issues, but there's no one bringing the standard up for everybody else. And it is a pretty big step for a young player to go from, okay, I'm going to be a really good defender by myself, to, okay, I'm going to do my job and be there and exert energy, demanding that from other players. Also, it's not or kind of vetting KD is not that type either. And Dorian Finney-Smith doesn't seem to be the most, outspoken guy in the sense, not of communication, but in the sense of being a leader. Doesn't seem to be his, his profile.
He's also only playing like 15 minutes a game. So
yeah, but I'm just saying it doesn't seem to be his vibe, right? But at least from watching him, doesn't seem to be his personality, right? And so this to say that it's just been a combination of a lot of factors. Some of them favorable, some of them might make me change my mind a little bit on what I think about the trade deadline. Perhaps I don't have something material on that yet because I would have to see if there's someone who fits that profile. But this is to say that between the unfortunate timing of injuries where we've never truly been at full capacity or with our full roster on, even without Fred, even discarding Fred VanVleet as a given, combine that with just the timing of our hot shooting versus not so hot shooting, combined with the timing of Sengun being out and then Sengun being back in, and then KD had to missed a couple of 2 or 3 games for, well, I don't know if that's public knowledge yet, so I'm not going to say it. But, it just seems like there's been a lot of things moving that have kept us from, just truly finding our groove. And it doesn't seem like we are just the team good enough to just steamroll games regardless of, like, we don't have an edge offensively to be able to just steamroll games regardless of those little things that kind of eat away at your margins when you're facing another team. And so because of that, I do think that I know I'm going really long here, but I do think that they can recover, and I do think that they can still get to a 55 win base, having some luck with injuries. And I do think that, as I said in previous pods, the most important thing is getting a top 3 seed, and they're currently have the same, and the measure for a good team is how many losses you have, not necessarily how many wins, because you expect to win most games. So having that in mind, they have the same amount of losses as what I think the 2 seed as well. Yeah, they have the same amount of losses as the Nuggets at 12 that are the 3 seed. They have one more loss than the 2 seed, the Spurs, and so they're going to have one less loss than the Wolves, who are in front of them, who are currently in front of them based on win percentage, of course, because they have more games played, 3 more games played. So they are very much like, this is like one game, 2 games from completely flipping and us being the 3 seed, and nobody's worried at that point, or at least I wouldn't be. So to me, as long as they are within striking distance of that 2-3 seed, I'm just not gonna panic, because the measure of this team is not really the regular season. The measure of this team is going to be in the playoffs eventually. And so I just struggle to be as doom and gloom as a lot of people have been on social media. Listen, this is the regular season for a team that's, that everybody basically already knows is a contender anyway. I don't think they're out there looking to prove themselves. So this is not last year. You can judge it by the same metrics as you judged the team last year. And even knowing that, I do think that they'll reach the same, at the very least, the same amount of wins as it did last season. They just come a different way. And when you lose a really close nail biter, where you put in a lot of defensive effort, it doesn't sting as bad as when you get blown out by just a team that you don't really respect, or that is not supposed to be that great. Like the Rockets did, for example, against the Clippers. Like last season, every win felt like a conquest, and this season, every win doesn't feel like a conquest because we are already there, right? We are already a contender, and so you don't get as big of a high from wins, and you get a much bigger kind of, I guess, the opposite of a high, or a much bigger low, I guess, from all the losses. And I think that's what, and we often come on the pod and we kind of play, the psychologists of Rockets Twitter and trying to understand what's going on in people's brains. And so I think that's mostly what's going on. I don't think there's anything to panic about. I'll panic when they are, when they start to be, 3-4 games behind the 3 seed. At that point, I'll start to worry. And it's not like they are in any danger of, knock on wood, obviously, but they aren't in any danger of falling into the play-in race. the Suns obviously have 3 more losses. That's a pretty big delta for the same amount of wins. I'm mostly, as I said before in pods, stay within striking distance of the 2 seed, cruise through the season, try to not pick up any season-ending injuries. These guys seem to already kind of know how to play with each other. There's no, nothing jumps out of the screen as far as rust goes, especially offensively. They kind of already know which spots is each player like, so it's not like they haven't, played enough games together and they're still trying to find that out. And then they know what their go-to is in the clutch and then all of that stuff. And everybody kind of knows what their space is within the team. So going forward, listen, the regular season, me, is about enjoying the games. Listen, if you win, I'll be happy. It will look good to keep piling wins on the standings. But if they lose, as long as, they don't lose too much for what a contender is supposed to do, I'm not going to be panicking over the worst stretch of the season being a 15-game stretch or a 17-game stretch where they're playing barely over 500 ball, because it also depends on how you look at it. If you can look at that 17-game stretch, or you can look at the last 7 games and see that they are 5-2, and at that point, okay, now we're in a contender pace. You are one tip in away from being 6-1 and not having these discussions at all. So yeah, I know it was a long rant. I'm down to go into more specific stuff if you want, Ben.
Yeah, I think the reason I fixate on the 17 is I go back to the first 17 and the expectations that I had coming out of October and November. And I think you're right. This team can still win 55 plus games. Everything is on the table. I just think it's becoming clearer that that juggernaut scenario isn't really on the table anymore, at least not in the regular season. And perhaps we never should have expected it after Fred's injury. It just feels like they sort of teased us with it a little bit and then it went away. Although I guess you can argue that this version that we've seen playing up or down to the competition, maybe there is more upside, because early in the year, there was that narrative of, oh, can they beat really good teams? Well, lately it's been sort of the reverse. They get up for the big games against the Nuggets, the Lakers, the spotlight. It's these sleepy games on the West Coast against lesser teams like the Kings, like the Trailblazers, like the Jazz that they're struggling with. And so maybe this model, while more frustrating, it provides more upside in the grand scheme. I'm open to that. Anyway, I want to move on and talk about individual players that are contributing to this. And, Kevin Durant has been brilliant. And this month, without Alperen Sengun, beyond just scoring at an extremely efficient level, which he's done since coming back at the end of November, he's also rebounding more. He's assisting more. He's been a better defender. He's just fantastic across the board. What he's doing at 37 years old is just absolutely phenomenal. But everyone's favorite whipping boy early in the season, Amen Thompson, that is no longer the case. Since the start of December, in 17 games, he's averaging right at 20 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists per game, shooting almost 56% overall. So Amen is getting better. It's pretty clear that slow start to the year from an efficiency perspective was an outlier. He's back to that guy he was all of last season, and perhaps the slow start is just, I've talked about it in the past. He's a very unique player in terms of his model, and it just takes him, I think, a little bit of time to get used to the NBA speed and physicality and finishing through the contact that he absorbs on a lot of his drives, because he is limited as a shooter. Bottom line, Amen has been very, very good. Even if he's not a traditional point guard, I think the bottom line, he's a very good player. And so no one is talking, or at least they shouldn't be, badly about Amen Thompson anymore. Since the start of December, he's been really good. Tari Eason, since getting promoted to the starting lineup around Christmas, he's looked good. Defensively, I was really encouraged by the work he did on Devin Booker late in that game against the Suns. He seems to be happily accepting the glue guy role alongside the high usage guys like KD, Amen, Sengun when he's able to play. And, some of the dip offensively is certainly due to not having Alperen Sengun, who's probably your best playmaker. So we do have to keep stating that. But I think in terms of the criticism, we mentioned a lot of the guys are playing well. The veterans that are sort of low ceiling, your Josh Okogie, Dorian Finney-Smith, Steven Adams. Well, Steven Adams has a higher ceiling, but offensively, he is what he is. He's not someone you're going to run offense through. Aaron Holiday, those vets, I sort of put them in the same bucket, Clint Capella as well, as they do what they do. You're not going to have too many highs or too many lows other than the games that Steven set out with his own ankle injury. Your defense did fall off a little bit, but that's to be expected. Just as Alperen Sengun is your floor raiser on offense, Steven Adams is your floor raiser on defense. And the ideal, of course, is to have them both so that you have a high floor on both sides of the ball. The last few weeks, it's been one or the other, and that explains some of the volatility. But in terms of the individuals, the two guys who are getting the most criticism are Jabari Smith Jr. and Reed Sheppard. And I'm surprised that it's as close as it is between those two guys, because when you look at the macro rather than the micro, I think it's pretty clear that Reed is the bigger issue. And that shouldn't come as a huge shock. He's just 21 years old. He's year two. So there's going to be a learning curve, and he was due to regress some after starting as hot as he did through that opening 17-game stretch. But the outrage I'm seeing, at least on my social media feed, directed at Jabari, look, you can say Jabari Smith's slump the last 3 games cost them wins in Dallas and Portland. That's fair. Both of those games, he had matching stat lines of 2 of 13 overall, 1 of 7 from 3. Yeah, it's really disappointing. We're talking about a 3-game stretch. And in the middle of that, by the way, the buzzer-beating win you had over the Suns, Jabari was your second leading scorer, had 17 points, 7 rebounds, shot 55% overall, and 38% from 3. So we're literally talking about 2 bad games for Jabari. Yes, bad games. Yes, you can say if Jabari shoots anywhere near his averages, they certainly win in Portland, and they probably win in Dallas. It is absolutely fair to say that. However, the season as a whole, what people are frustrated by is not just one game in a vacuum because it's an 82-game season. No, it's about the downturn overall since December. And what we've seen the last 3 games, it's simply not representative. This is a guy in Jabari, just 22 years old. Even though he's year 4, he's still developing. He's still very young. And as recently as a week ago, he was at career highs across the board in terms of his scoring, his shooting efficiency. Now, that's fallen off a little bit in the past week. But the point is, there's no reason that 1 week should dramatically change your opinion of a player that much. Look at the previous 12 games before these 3 that we're talking about. The 3-game stretch, the Mavs, the Suns, and the Blazers. Really only 2 of them bad, the Mavs and the Blazers, but we'll look at the 3 in aggregate. The 12 games before that, Jabari averaged over 17 points and 7 rebounds per game, shot nearly 49% overall, above 40% from 3, scored at least 15 points in 10 of the 12 games. There's this stat going back multiple seasons. When the Rockets have Jabari score at least 15 points, they have a phenomenal record, in part because if you get Jabari as a scorer on top of what he brings you defensively as a connector, all the other aspects of his game, then that's when this team, especially the offensive limited one that they've been at times these past few seasons, is very difficult to beat. That's literally the 12 games before these past 3. So these past 3 for Jabari, disappointing, absolutely. He'll be the first to admit it. And it's definitely taken his season-long numbers down a little bit. They're not dreadful. He's just not having the clear step forward that he was a week ago. But there's no reason your analysis should change that dramatically from a week ago. It's been a bad week. I think he'll bounce back. You can attribute some of it to not having Sengun, but quite frankly, a lot of looks were open. He just missed them. It happens. I think he'll bounce back. What I'm more worried about is Reed Sheppard, because the last 9 games, going back to before Christmas, he's shooting just above 40% overall and 30% from 3. And the defense is getting increasingly targeted. To me, it comes down to, for Reed's model to work with the defensive limitations that he has, he needs to hit 3s at volume. He needs to be a guy in the 40s rather than the 30s. Otherwise, he's still worth playing because there's going to be games where he can carry you. I'm certainly not saying you're going to kick him out of the rotation, but in stretches where he's shooting poorly and he's young and still developing his body and undersized, he's costing you defensively. And he's just overall not a net positive player when he plays like this. And that's not a 2 or 3 game stretch. That's almost 10. That goes back to before Christmas. And that's not meant to be an indictment on Reed. He's much younger than even Jabari. And so these ups and downs are inevitably going to happen. It's not to say there's any reason to panic over him or that his long-term outlook has dramatically changed. No, But when we talk about the downturn since the start of December, when we talk about them going from a 13-4 juggernaut with insane metrics to just 9-8 mediocrity, Reed has been much more of an issue than Jabari. Like on my social media feed, I saw some people today talking about potentially starting Reed over Jabari, and my reaction was, what the hell? I mean, Reed has been a much bigger issue and for a longer period of time. I don't understand it. And I think part of what's going on, Paulo, so the last few games, Steven Adams either didn't play because of his ankle injury, or then when he played, he started because Alperen Sengun was hurt. And so when Reed comes off the bench, but Steven either sits out or starts, he doesn't have the Steven stimulus package. That's what I'll call it, where Steven comes in and can set the right screens and free him up. When Reed is playing without Steven, that makes it much more difficult for him to operate relative to, the first 25 games of the year, when it felt like almost all the time it was Reed and Steven coming in at about the 6-minute mark of the first and third quarters and largely playing together. So if we're talking about making a change to the starting lineup, which I don't think Ime Udoka is considering at all, by the way, but you want to play Reed with Steven more, not less. I think that's what the data clearly shows you. And knock on wood, Sengun should be back within the next few games. So hopefully, getting everyone healthy and back in their normal roles will help. Some of this is just natural, ebbs and flows of an NBA season. Get Steven back to his 6th, 7th man role, and you can pair him with Reed, and maybe that helps Reed get back in the rhythm that he was at prior to the holidays. But in terms of what's happened the last few weeks, look, Jabari has cost them the last couple of games with subpar shooting, and he's frustrated. And I get why in year 4, it's easy to say, it's easy sort of to make Jabari Smith Jr. this year what Jalen Green was last year. But that's not what the Rockets are asking from Jabari as a player. It's simply not. It's Reed Sheppard, especially when, this is not Reed's fault, but his archetype as a player became even more important to this year's team when Fred VanVleet went out. And so the fact that that archetype suddenly isn't working as well anymore, you already lost Fred, gone on for almost 10 games, that is much more worrisome. I don't think it means anything in the grand scheme, but in terms of why this team has lost games at a little bit of a greater rate lately, I would say it has a lot more to do with Reed Sheppard than Jabari Smith Jr., even though it feels like, at least on my timeline, the majority of the outrage, so to speak, is being directed at Jabari. Paulo, what do you think as far as those individual storylines? And, if you had to blame someone for why the Rockets have shown this downturn in form, who would you pick?
Yeah, this is gonna be a bit boring because I agree with you. I'm just gonna add a couple of points on top of what you already said. I don't think Jabari is part of the problem at all. Like, he's had a couple of bad games. He's also had some really good games. He's one of our best clutch time shot makers as far as not being afraid of the moment when the ball gets kicked out to him in the clutch. He's someone who is unique as far as in our team, as far as being able to get those in between shots reliably. KD is obviously the best at it, maybe of all time, but Jabari does it in a different way because KD is always getting, grabbing off that attention, and he's probably on our team the guy that gets the most attention from the defense. And Jabari, it's really unexpected to defensive teams because typically when you're seeing a role player like that, you're saying, oh, okay, I just don't want him to shoot a 3 or get a layup. And for Jabari, getting that in between shots a lot of the time is what connects possessions offensively when we're struggling to get baskets, or when we don't want to go through all of the energy and effort that it takes to generate an open 3 or force the ball or force a drive to the rim. Jabari brings something to our offense that keeps it in rhythm in a way that most role play or most guys that play his position and have the skill set don't. So I don't think it's a Jabari problem at all. I've talked about it before. I've been pretty impressed with Jabari as a player. I think he has evolved in basically every aspect of his game this season. And I don't think that 3 bad games. Well, it's not even really. Is it 3 bad games?
It's 2. It's 2.
Yeah, it's not even 3 bad games. Like, he was good against the Suns. So I don't see it. It seems like perhaps people are frustrated and looking for someone to blame. Obviously,
I'm blaming the year 2 guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't blame a man anymore, and then Sengun's not there playing. So if people want to blame someone, fine. I do think that when we talk about Reed, that is something worth talking about because he hasn't been great for a few games now. And I guess it was never, he's someone whose impact comes a lot from the fact that he can shoot the ball from anywhere, right? And in the last, few games, call it 10 games, he hasn't been able to do it at the clip that he was doing it earlier on in the season. And that's to be expected. He was shooting nearly 50% from three. It was never expected for him to keep that up. And if you went from that to just, what his true average is, let's say his true average is 43%, which is really, really good. If his true average were 43% for the season and he started the way he started, he would have had an insane shooting season anyway. So you got to average it out. He was going to have a slump so that his true average would be what his average is, right? And so it's expected for a guy, especially a young player, to have a slump like that. But even if it isn't the young player, that's just how the math works, right? So it was never sustainable to have Reed shoot that high of a percentage from three. So the fact that it's happening now, it's sort of to be expected. It's not a big indictment on Reed, but it still does feel when you watch the games. It still does feel like when Reed comes into the game, you get that offensive wildcat feeling where we've seen him take over games, and we've seen and we see him come into the game. And we typically think, okay, here comes Reed. Let's see what Reed's got. We're excited to see what Reed's going to give us tonight. It's a different feeling than what it is to Jabari, where we're kind of, the ceiling isn't as high, the floor isn't as low. You kind of know what you're going to get. And in the off chance that he does have a great game, he's not going to be too applauded for it. In the rare times that he has a bad game, it stands out, right? But it shouldn't, because we also don't do it when he has a great. We also don't give him credit, or too much credit. We don't go out of our way to give him credit when he has a really good game. So it really feels like, okay, we kind of know what Jabari is. He might become a little bit better throughout his career, but it's the same feeling we had when we drafted him, played during the reveal. It's like, okay, this guy's an unknown. He's exciting. Let's see what he's going to give us tonight. And for that reason, people are, I guess, quicker to jump on let's start Reed over Jabari, not necessarily because of how well they've been playing, because if that's the case, I don't think that that's a discussion. It's more so that it's more exciting to watch, perhaps. And so in a situation where Jabari is playing below his standard, people are going to jump at the chance to have Reed start, just like they jumped at the chance to have Reed start when a man wasn't playing to his standard, right? When Reed's always going to be the first guy that people think, okay, let's start Reed and see if it fixes it. Because they already want to watch Reed play more anyway, and that's the next step. I don't think it necessarily comes from a genuine place of, I think this is going to lead to better basketball for the team at this moment in time. It might have been true not with Jabari, but it might have been true a couple of weeks back when people wanted to start him for a Kogi and stuff like that. At that point, there was an argument to be made. At this point, I don't think there's an argument to be made, because even offensively, Reed's playing worse than Jabari. And so why would you give up what you give up defensively? It just doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't seem like a smart discussion. As far as your question of what's the reason the Rockets are losing games, I mean, teams lose games. I don't think there's a single reason. KD's playing out of his mind. The man is playing really well. Why
With social media, there's always someone to blame, Paulo. Come on.
Yeah. I don't know. Listen, Ben, you're in the building. What's the name of the Rockets training staff? Like the highest ranked
Jason Biles?
staff guy. Yeah, Blaine. But is he a recovery guy or is he a prevention guy?
He's the head trainer, so it starts with Jason Biles. Let's blame him.
Okay.
I'm joking.
Bench Jason Biles for one of his assistants. Can we get an hashtag bench Jason Biles on Twitter going?
Willie Cruz, director of athletic performance. So yeah, bench
hashtag Biles,
promote Willie Cruz.
Yeah, hashtag start Willie Cruz.
There you go.
There's some name as well.
It is. So one implication of the Reed struggles, and we're not there yet. We're talking 9, 10 games. It's still relatively small in the grand scheme, but I do think it's interesting that this is happening in the weeks leading up to the trade deadline, because we did an episode a few weeks ago, right when trade season unofficially began on the 15th, when everyone around the league became trade eligible. And we both made the case for why this was likely to be a relatively quiet window. And gun to my head, I still think it will be. However, I have started to open my mind a little bit. I still don't think they're doing anything major, but if Reed continues to struggle for the 10 or 15 games leading into the trade deadline in early February, like that's the one spot where you potentially could get a lot of bang for a little buck. Like just get a high floor role player at the point guard spot that can help you limit turnovers and not get abused defensively to the extent you do with Reed. Now, this is all under the hypothetical that what we've seen from Reed the last few weeks continues. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully we get back to the dynamic Reed that we saw the first 6 weeks or so of the season. And this is all just, the bumps, the ebbs and flows that come from being a developing young player in the NBA. It's certainly possible. But there's also another world where, hey, if he's sort of hit his sophomore wall, so to speak, because he barely played as a rookie, you could potentially get, a more dynamic, perhaps a little bigger version of Aaron Holiday for not that much cost. Now, maybe it's not a trade, maybe it's the buyout market, but you could bring in, I think, a fairly high floor vet without giving up a ton. You could give up, Clint Capella as matching salary, some combination of Jayshawn Tate, Jeff Green, if you need it. Second round draft capital, nothing major. My point is that you have the ability, both financially and with assets, to bring in a high floor player that could be an upgrade to Reed Sheppard, especially if you don't feel like Fred VanVleet's going to come back. And I've been told that the Rockets are hopeful that by February, ideally by the trade deadline, but certainly by the All-Star break, they think they'll have more clarity. They won't know for sure, but by the time you get to February, you're within a couple of months of the playoffs. And so I think by that point, they'll have a better idea as to whether it's realistic. All indications to this point, like Fred's doing, more and more on-court work. And so everybody's saying the right things, that they're still hopeful of a return. But is that possible? The playoffs would start 7 months since the injury, since his ACL surgery. The Rockets will have a better idea come February by the time you get inside that 2-month window. And so if it doesn't look good on Fred, and if Reed is still at the level we've seen the last 10 games, then that's the one spot where you might not have to invest that much, but you could get a lot of bang for your buck, at least in terms of, the playoff formula. Like, I don't think you're certainly not going to stop playing Reed in the regular season. He needs to get better. He needs to continue developing, but it could potentially provide an insurance policy for the playoffs that, a month or so ago, we didn't think would be necessary at all. Like my response at the time was, who are you going to take away minutes from? If you bring in someone, how are they going to play? Well, I think now there's a pretty clear path where someone could play and upgrade this rotation relative to what we've seen from Reed the last 9 or 10 games. And I don't know if you want to do it in the regular season, but especially if you're pessimistic on Fred's ability to return by the playoffs, then I could see it making a little more sense to pursue a veteran guard, if not by trade, certainly by the buyout market. Not saying a huge acquisition, nothing super transformative, but I guess Reed's struggles the last 10 days or so have me a little more open-minded to exploring that guard market. Paulo, where are you at in terms of, I guess, how Reed's struggles impact the trade deadline? Have you moved off your position at all relative to a few weeks ago? Not to say that my position has entirely changed, but my mind is opening a little bit. That's where I'm at. Paulo, where are you at on the trade front?
You've been consumed by the national media goons who want us to trade for a point guard just because we don't have one on paper. That's my accusation.
Fine, but I was withstanding it for the first 6 weeks when Reed looked that good. I was like, hell no. Just keep developing your young guy who already is of that archetype. But now, as the losses mount, Reed struggles, the turnovers are still an issue. I'm sort of like, I'm still not gung-ho over it. I wouldn't go crazy, but I'm more open to it than I was a month ago. That's the way I'd put it.
Okay, so a couple of things. The first one is in a trade or in any trade, if they give up Quint, they would struggle to basically they can only send out, like, you shouldn't count the minimum guys as salary matching because the Rockets are already at 14, and any
You can shave up a little bit with with like 10 days, but yeah, I get your point. Yeah.
yeah, but they're gonna struggle. Just to complete the thought, if you send those guys out, you're obliged to sign guys for that same minimum from the free agent market. So you're not getting more space. Like if you wanna, let's matter. Not explaining this to you because I know you understand. Just explaining it to the audience. If you package Capella, Jeff Green, and Jason Tate, right? If you go look at the trade machine, that's gonna get you to like 11, 12 million, right? The problem is you can't take 11, 12 million back. It's kind of useless to send them out because before the trade's complete, the NBA places like basically
Cap hole.
a
is what
roster
it's called.
charge or a cap
Yeah.
hold. Yeah, a cap hold that's a roster charge as a placeholder for those players that you're setting out because you can't be below the threshold of players, right? And so you're not actually you're not actually being able to bring more salary back by including those players. So you might as well keep those two. So basically, the outgoing salary is just Clint Capella. If you want it to be more than Clint Capella, you have to package Clint Capella with a guy making more than the minimum. And this to say that for just Clint Capella money, it's going to be tough to find a tangible upgrade. Considering how Dorian Finney-Smith is playing, the most kind of short-sighted move that I'm willing to tolerate is if you want to include Capella and Dorian Finney-Smith to go get a piece, it's going to be a key rotation piece. Because at that point, you're getting to like 18, 19 million, a player making 18, 19 million. And then at that point, you're getting, I think you're getting enough of a return. And I think Dorian Finney-Smith, you'd be selling low on Dorian Finney-Smith, and I think he has the potential to be a really good contract moving forward just because he's better than what he's shown. I'm not sure he's going to be better than what he has shown this season. That's a risk. So
I will say, to go back to the trade deadline pod, you could get my Keon Ellis suggestion. That would work for Capella. Now, I don't know if you necessarily have the assets, but there's a few guys in that $6-7 million tier that would be upgrades, at least relative to what we've seen from Reed the last couple of weeks.
yes, Keon Ellis would be an upgrade. I'm not denying that at all. I'm just not sure what the incentive is for the Kings to trade them for a couple of second rounds that are likely not going to turn out to be players better than what Keon Ellis is right now. I think
They're the
smarter
Kings,
move-
Paulo.
True, they are the Kings, but I think the smarter. I can't. If we're gonna, and I know you're joking, but if we're gonna treat, just say the Kings are gonna do something dumb anyway. Why don't we just treat the Mavs are gonna do something dumb anyway because it's really Luka Doncic. Let's go and trade for,
Yeah.
I don't know, someone good from them, like Derek Lively or something like that. Which even though we have too many in it, so getting back on track. What I could be convinced to do is packaging Quint and Dorian Finney-Smith, and I'm not necessarily sure that's a good idea. Like, I don't think I would advocate for it, but if they did it, I wouldn't be too mad. Like, I would accept. Okay, you wanna put a little bit more stock on this season. You think you can win the championship this season. You don't want to go all in, but you're willing to put a little bit more chips on the table. And I think getting rid of Dorian Finney-Smith right now at what I would think would be selling low and packaging him with Clint Capella is short-sighted, but it's a buy-in low enough that I would be understanding if they did it. If it were up to me, that would have to be a trade for an enforcer type, like a Dylan Brooks type, Fred VanVleet type, one of those guys. I don't know who would be available at this point, but it would have to be one of those types of guys for me to be able to buy into a move like that. As far as what you said for targeting a point guard, I think Reed will bounce back, and I would rather see that. And if he doesn't, I do think Keon Ellis is considerably better than Aaron Holiday. But still, I think Aaron Holiday is serviceable enough for me to be comfortable living with the risk that Reed doesn't snap out of this funk that he's in. So, betting on Reed, I think, is a low enough risk that I'm willing to just have the second option in case it goes wrong, be just play Aaron Holiday more, or just edge that Fred VanVleet might come back as well. So unless you can, unless you can go get a guy like Ayodezunmu or something like that for a couple of second rounders straight up for Quinn Capella, like that I could get behind, obviously, but I'm not sure that that's available. But yeah, going to the trade deadline, I'm mostly looking for, if you want to, if you want to go splashy without going for a superstar, I think trading for the enforcer would be a good trade, would be a good move. Kind of wish Dylan Brooks weren't playing as well as he is, because he'd be the perfect guy. Yeah, he'd be the perfect guy. And I'm not even sure if we could do it because I don't think you can trade back for a player that's traded away in the same season.
By the way, did you notice Dylan for several minutes after that game went final talking to Tillman and Patrick Fertitta on the court? Like,
Dylan.
yeah, I can't help but think that one day Dylan's going to come back. He's still loved within this organization, and quite frankly, I think he still loves the Rockets. It's just circumstances that led to him having to go out as salary filler for KD. And so, yeah, it won't be this year for a number of reasons. But if I had to bet, I think at some point in the future he'll be back. There's just too many reasons.
I think, yeah, I think that'd be nice, and I think that there's something to be said for the fact that the Rockets paid Dylan, I would say, pretty handsomely for what his market was back then.
Agreed.
At a time that a lot of people didn't believe in Reed and Dylan, sorry. And he definitely played worth his every penny of his salary. He held up his end of the bargain, but still, it felt like there was a lot of loyalty there. And when you're getting traded for KD, it's like, well, I know Dylan is like a really kind of self-belief kind of guy, but when you get traded for KD, and it's clearly not, it's not about trading you away. And I think Dylan understands also, like, part of the move. I think Dylan kind of understands that part of the move was replacing Jalen with someone better than Jalen, and he was just a casualty of having to have someone else out there filling salary. And I just think he understood, like, we didn't want to get rid of you at all. We just didn't have any other choice. And then when you're trading for KD, it's like, okay, I got traded for KD.
Yeah.
Who do I think I am?
Right. All right, last topic, and we'll be quick because we're already almost an hour in. I'm curious your thoughts on the last few games and whether it changes your evaluation of Alperen Sengun in any way. Because it's always interesting when you talk about a high usage player like that to see what the team looks like if they have to go away for a few games. And certainly the offense overall has taken a dip. And I guess what's changed for me, and certainly, I was already high on Alperen Sengun, but you feel his absence. I think the shooting dip, I don't so much attribute to Shingun's absence, maybe a little bit, but I think that's, trying a little too hard to have a one-size-fits-all explanation for what amounts to randomness. The Rockets have had a lot of really good looks from three the past few games that just aren't going in. There was that one possession at the end of the Blazers game. You can find it on the Clutch Fans Twitter page where they had like 5 or 6 good looks on a single possession and missed them all. Sometimes that's going to happen over 82. They're getting good looks. They're in rhythm. They're just not going in. I think they will go in as the sample increases. You can look at Jabari Smith. He shot 1 of 7 from 3 in the 2 games that he played terribly in Dallas and Portland. Yet in Houston, he had some really big threes in that second half comeback against the Suns when, by the way, Kaulo, they broke the curse of 13. You had pointed out a few days ago that the Rockets had never come back from 13 plus down this season, and then they did. So hat tip to you. You reverse jinx that comeback against the Suns into reality. But
so let me just interrupt you there. I believe that stat might have been fraudulent, that I might have misread.
Oh.
The way, so basically, listen, I don't have any fancy stat subscriptions. I'm old school. When I see a trend, I go game by game and I see if the trend's true. I felt like we couldn't come back from double-digit deficits. And so I went game by game. I didn't even go to reference because much there is they have, margin of victory. I don't know if or bigger than any. And so what I did is I went to my live score app, which happens to be Sofa Score or whatever it might be, or whatever it might be pronounced. And they do have like a graphic with the highest lead for either team. And I went game by game and I checked it. it is apparently possible that I might have missed one game or two where the lead was, I think 14 and they came back, and I just must have, misclicked or clicked the game or lost track of it and skipped the game. But apparently, or someone pointed out to me that stat was not true. But still, even if instead of 2-9 or whatever it was, it's 3-9, the point still stands.
Yeah, absolutely. They have not been great at coming back from larger deficits this season. They finally got one. Unfortunately, they couldn't get two. Nearly came back after trailing most of the way in Portland, but couldn't finish that one off. Anyway,
that is the symptom of a really good team. The opposite. When you're watching really good teams, when you're watching OKC, when you're watching the Nuggets, or when you were watching the Warriors back then, or like when you're watching a good team and they're down big to a bad team, if they're within 15 in today's NBA, right, and it's still somewhat early, second quarter or beginning of the third, you still kind of expect the contender to beat the bad team, right? You expect them to come back, to start playing serious at a certain point and come back. So the fact that the Rockets are mostly unable to do that is something that does worry me, because that's typically what happens with good teams. You're like, when you're rooting for another team to lose and they're really good, you never feel safe with a 13-point lead, which is what the stat was about.
Yeah.
And it feels like with the Rockets, when they're down that much, it starts to feel a little out of reach. It starts to feel like Craig Ackerman has a phrase that he typically uses. I think the phrase is, you start to feel like it's getting late early. I think Craig used to says that a lot. I love that expression. So that's what it feels like.
Yeah. To this point, they haven't had that dog in them. It feels like, when they fall behind, that they sort of shrug their shoulders. Not everybody, but there's a little bit of a here we go again vibe. This isn't our night. And so you'd like to see them play with a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder, which, they've done a little bit more of late. They did come back against the Suns. They were literally a tenth of a second from doing the same thing in Portland. So ideally, you don't want to fall behind to begin with, but it's going to happen sometimes in the NBA. You do need the ability to battle back. And if you squint hard enough, they are making a little bit of strides there. Anyway, to get back to the Sengun point, I don't think it's radically changed my view of Sengun. I certainly don't think that he's the main reason the three-point shooting has dipped from, best in the NBA to the worst. I think that's small sample size theater. But I do think you've seen some more just absolutely bizarre turnovers. I don't think the overall turnovers have increased, but there's been more just absolutely baffling ones where guys are just indecisive because they've all been pushed up a couple of notches in the hierarchy in terms of, trying to create and where the shot's going to come from. And so there's more indecision. There's guys that are doing a little too much. The roles are not as simplified as they normally are. And I think, perhaps it can get ironed out over time. Hopefully, knock on wood, we don't have to find out and Sengun comes back relatively quickly. But I just don't think I fully appreciated until Sengun went out just how many possessions that he always gives them a chance. It's not to say that the turnovers have just gotten out of control since then. No, but I think you've seen more just absolutely baffling ones that make zero sense. And you've seen more possessions that it feels like are going nowhere, where they just pass the ball back and forth and then, it's like a hot potato and KD's got it and there's 5 on the shot clock and he's just got to put something up. There's just a lot less structure than what we're used to. There's a lot less planning. And so that leads to just more freelancing. It leads to more uncertainty. And I think maybe over time they could overcome it. It hurts that Reed is going through his slump at the same time Sengun is out because, if you're going to lose one of the best offensive players in the NBA, then Reed's one of the guys with high upside that even though he's a different position, you like say, okay, let's give him more touches. Well, that doesn't make sense right now with how he's playing, as we were just describing. So I don't know that it's radically changed my view of Alperen Sengun, but you certainly feel his absence. And I guess what I keep coming back to, there's a lot of possessions on offense where it just feels like I just look at it and I say, what the hell are they doing? Where are they going? And oftentimes it leads to turnovers that make zero sense because there's just no plan. And Perhaps that improves as the games without Sengun rise. I mean, hopefully there's only 2 or 3 more of those. But, yeah, it has given me a greater appreciation for just how much the Rockets depend on Sengun in volume. The analogy I did on one of my podcasts recently, I think it was the postgame show that, Dave Hardesty and I had with Michael Shapiro. I compared Sengun to a Framber Valdez type innings eater that over a long season like the NBA, there's just so many innings, or in this case, possessions to get through, that when someone is durable and able to soak up a lot of those and at least give you a chance at a positive outcome, that has a lot of value. And when you lose a guy like that and you have to fill out all these possessions over 82 games, or in the Astros case, losing Framber, fill out your rotation over 162, you don't feel it until the player is gone. And that's how I felt on a much smaller scale about Sengun the last couple of weeks. So, Paulo, what are your thoughts as we close out the pod on the absence of Sengun, and has it sort of changed your view of him in any way?
Before I answer that, the NBA comp for your innings eater kind of cross sports metaphor is, as much as it pains me to say it, is Russell Westbrook.
Oh,
It is. It's someone who's going to give you volume production in the regular season. He's going to be, moderately efficient. And Vendo Sengun's been.
I hope someone clips
been-
this and accuses you on Twitter of comparing Sengun to Russ.
Listen, look. I mean, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but it's not that bad of a comparison.
No, Russ was actually
When you consider
for a long time.
is your ass right? Because Russ was very good, but he was never overly efficient. And Sengun fought a center at this moment, and then the last season as well. For his position, Sengun is not overly efficient. He has a lot of turnovers. He's been very turnover prone, but he does get a lot of assists. And he is someone who fills in the gaps between your ceiling raisers, and that's what he's showing now. And I don't mean to make that sound like a bad thing. Well, I would have loved Jalen Green to be an innings eater. Sorry. I meant it to make both groups angry now. Well, can I make someone? Is there any other fandom is there any other standom that I can make angry right now? I don't know.
We could do Jeremy Lin analogy. No, that's going back before your time.
To respond to Jack's question, which is, what has this taught of me about Sengun? Well, I talked about earlier on in another pod that I felt Sengun's defensive effort was not up to the standard that it was last season, and I just still believe that. And that took a little bit of the shine of his season away from me, for me. And I guess now noticing what we're missing when he's gone offensively, especially because the defense has been better. I guess that shine that the season had lost on, or that he had lost on me for this season, I guess that shines back. Like I'm back. Okay, I'm back to saying Sengun was the level of play that I thought he was 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think some of the reactions are over the top in terms of attributing everything to his absence, but yeah, it is fair to say that the problems they have and have had, it's pretty clear that some of the more dire outlooks for Sengun specifically in terms of his archetype and how it plays, I think it's being proven that that's not really the issue, because very much some of those things are still happening. I think in the macro, Sengun is your floor raiser offensively, Steven is your floor raiser defensively is still true, but they're both just well-rounded players who provide value on both ends in most games. And I think that's something that has stood out when not just Sengun, but Steven as well have missed time the last couple of weeks. Hopefully, knock on wood, we don't have much more of that moving forward. Anyway, with that, we'll bring this episode to a close. One final shout out, go Texans. We went over an hour today, so I didn't get in any Texans talk, but yes, we will be watching, and hopefully we'll have a playoff game to celebrate when we return with an episode next week, or a playoff win to celebrate, I should say. We'll certainly have a playoff game on Monday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Thankfully, Texans playoff game comes on an off day for the Rockets. So Rockets have Portland tonight, Sacramento on Monday, or Sacramento on Sunday, excuse me, then the Texans Monday, and then starting Tuesday, the Rockets had a 5-game homestand at Toyota Center. Finally, the schedule will even out. They have 5 games in the next 8 days inside their home arena, so it's going to come very, very quickly. Anyway, with that, I'll bring this episode to a close. And if you want more from us before the next show, the best place to hear from us is on social media. I'm on there at Ben DuBose, Paulo at Paulo Alves NBA. But as far as plugs, just go to LaunchPod790 on Twitter/X, hit up the link tree in the bio, and that's got everything you'll need as far as USA Today's Rockets Wire, Sports Talk 790, Clutch Fans, the Clutch Fans YouTube channel, where I've been doing post-game shows with Dave Hardesty. Anything you can do to support us, this show, our friends and partners, it's all in that link tree on LaunchPod790. If you aren't already following, please do. And it's also got the links to all the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you haven't subscribed, left a positive review already, please do. We would certainly appreciate that. And with that, we'll bring this episode to a close.